Hello. I think it is finally time that I talked about this. I've been meaning and wanting to make this video for years, literally years, but I've been hesitant and nervous to because I want to adequately do justice to this book. I want to try to describe why it means so much to me, and that feels like a lot to take on. But I think more than to try to present an authoritative account of this book, it's more important that I describe my passion for it and why this book has been a companion to me through much of my life, and why I've returned to it and reread it in so many different periods of my life, and how its meaning has evolved and grown for me, and also to describe my reading journey with this book, because when I first picked up the novel The Waves by Virginia Woolf, this wasn't instantly my favorite book of all time. I found it really difficult to get into. Its meaning was very ambiguous and strange to me, but as I've returned to it, it's changed for me. I've developed such a deeper appreciation for it, and the meaning of the story, and the my relationship with the characters has changed as I've continued to grow and change over time. And so it's like the text of this book has almost transformed on the page, which is an incredible thing. And I think that is the most extraordinary thing about great pieces of art, that as we view them and see them and return to them over time, they will change for us. And I think this is really tied into the story of this book, which is about 6 characters, following them from their early childhood till late in their lives. And so this book can stay with you throughout your life, and you can return to it, and it will change for you, because as you grow and experience different things and understand life from a different perspective, as you get older, its meaning will change for you. And it is a challenging book to get into, and I know a lot of people find it really difficult to read first off, because it is in many ways Virginia Woolf's most experimental novel. She published it in 1931. She had been working on it and thinking about it for a long time, but it's almost the epitome of her style, of this kind of stream of consciousness style that she worked in as a different way of representing consciousness and the experience of life from how it's been represented in literature before. So we follow these 6 different characters through their speech, and it revolves between their different perspectives, where it will start saying Bernard said or Ginny said, but they are not speaking aloud. This isn't a naturalistic form of writing where they are talking to themselves or each other, or even necessarily consciously thinking these things. It's more a kind of subconscious speech. It can be described as soliloquies, because it's a highly poetic form of writing and speech. It's more they're absorbing the experience of the world, and it's their sensory experience of the world, but it's also how it translates and relates to their personality in particular. It's kind of filtered through their perspective. And so it's difficult to approach this novel for the first time, because it's almost like you need to change the way you read books and approach narrative in order to understand and appreciate this text. And I know that's a really difficult thing for a lot of readers, and I know when we go into reading a book, we don't want to be so challenged in this way that it can feel quite alienating. But I think there are certain books, and this novel definitely is one which is worth taking the time with and being patient with and trying to understand the meaning of what Virginia Woolf is doing in this book, because I think once you do, it will acquire such resonance and meaning for you, hopefully, like it has for me over the course of my life. So I first encountered this novel quite early on in my life. I think I was maybe 19 or 20 years old. I was going to college, and my college, Goddard in Vermont, had quite a large library, and which I'd love to just wander around and pick out certain books in and read bits of text and continue on with them, or put them down and pick up something else. And The Waves is one of the books that I found, and I think I'd read some bits of Virginia Woolf's writing before, but this is the first time I encountered this book, and I started reading it, and I found the language and the poetic nature of it, the beauty of it, so beguiling, and that it really captured my attention, but I really didn't understand what was going on or what was being discussed, or understood the difference between these characters, because I think when you start reading it, the voices of the characters can feel quite samey because it is written in this very poetic style and this strange subconscious speech. But once you continue reading it and rereading it, the voices and personalities of these characters become very distinct. And so now I feel like if I flip to any one section and start reading it, I can pick out what character is speaking and what perspective we're getting in these different sections. And I think part of the why Virginia Woolf wrote in this way is that she was showing that there is this commonality between us as humans that connects us, that we are in many ways the same. We go through the same significant life stages throughout the course of our life, and following the path of our lives from our childhood to late in our life. And for many of us will have this experience, share this experience of aging throughout our life, if we're lucky enough to continue to later in our lives, which is a significant thing that Virginia Woolf often comments upon within her stories, that some people's lives are cut unnaturally short, and there's a great tragedy of that, and many of us have to continue on knowing and thinking about people we have known and how we have lost them. And such an important thing about this book is its representation of our connection with each other, both our commonality with each other, but also the connections we form in our lives, and how these connections with our family, with our friends, with our lovers make up such an important part of our lives and are so integral to our existence and are really about the meaning of life, but how we always have a distance from each other. No matter how close we can feel to certain people in our lives, there is still a distance and a difference between us. And so it's kind of tracing those connections, but also those disconnections between us. And the way she represents this in the narrative, following these different characters throughout their lives, is so powerful and beautiful. There's a very important seventh character in this book called Percival, who is in some ways a kind of idealized version of existence for these different characters. They admire and love him, but we never get his perspective, and that's quite significant, and how she incorporates that into the story says something much larger about this. There is also in this book, in opening sections, when there leaps forward in time in these characters' lives, there are these short, very poetic sections tracing the course of the sun across the sky, and how the light falling upon the environment changes how we see and understand the world around us. And so she, in these opening passages, throughout the different sections, she describes the movement of this light, and it is so beautiful, and it connects to and relates to how our lives grow and change over the course of our lives. And she's connecting the path of the sun over the course of the day with the movement from childhood to old age, and how this reflects experience from the dawn of our lives and experiencing the world. And in the opening sections, we follow the characters very much in how they are experiencing and relating to the world and trying to understand it. And then in the later sections, it's much more reflective. It's much more pondering the memories of these different characters and them thinking about their relations to each other, and also how their hopes for life have either been achieved or not achieved, and thinking about the possible different courses their lives could have taken. And this is something that so naturally happens as we get older. We think about possible paths we might have taken in life, because at certain points we have to make certain decisions about what we want to do in our lives, who we want to be with, the connections we want to foster or let go. And it's so moving how the characters ponder this later on in their lives, but also continue to have new experiences, and things occur that change and help them to grow or stymie their growth. And it's how she contains this is so meaningful. And so I have returned to read and reread this book and have developed much greater appreciation for these later sections, naturally, as I've gotten older, as more gray and white has started to form in my hair, and I've developed more wrinkles. I know where these characters are coming from in these later sections, whereas in the earlier sections, when I was younger, I related to them a lot more strongly, because there was all the buoyancy and excitement of youth and the possibilities of life and meeting new people. And also, when it gets to these later sections, I think you start to develop a greater appreciation for how she chooses to end this book. And it's really interesting what she does with these different perspectives, and eventually focuses on one perspective in particular, and what this says about the narrative as a whole, of thinking about it in a different possible way, that it might actually all be from one character's perspective. Or it might be a single character who is trying to contain the experience of his life through describing his own experiences, but also the experiences and points of view of the people in his life that he's been closest to, that have meant the most to him. And what this says about friendship and our connections with each other. There are multiple times in these later sections when he reflects our friends, how distant, how often little visited, and how little known. He repeats that multiple times, and I think this takes on a resonance, as we understand the people closest to us, that we consider the closest to us in our lives. Quite often, we don't often see them all that much, because life is so busy, life is so made up of experiences that we are compelled and forced to do out of necessity, that we don't often get to spend as much time with the people that we love the most. And there's a kind of tragedy to this, and it adds to this sense that we can't fully know and understand the people in our lives. And there's also this expression that he gives multiple times, of this sense of must, the demands of life, that life, because we need to work, we need to maintain both ourselves and our homes and our communities. There are things we have to do in our lives, and this is part of this, in many ways, this makes up the experience of life, of what we do in our day-to-day lives, but also it feels like this is slightly disconnected from who we feel ourselves to be inside, our integral sense of our existence and who we are isn't necessarily made up of all these details of our day-to-day lives. It's more about our sense of who we are as people. And it is so beautiful how she represents this in the story, rather than the characters giving us what the characters are consciously thinking, or the dialogue that they're saying to each other, or describing their experiences, because that's not really the most important thing. The most important thing is who we feel ourselves to be inside, and how we are relating to and understanding the world around us, how we are processing that through our individual selves, but how we also have commonalities between us, of touchstones between us. And so this book has continued to mean so much to me, and I've continued love to experience it and in different ways. And from a relatively young person reading this in the backwoods of Vermont to now, I live in London itself, and so will reread this book when I'm out in the city or when I'm in my home here. And I love to reread it on audio, of listening to an audiobook when I'm walking through the city or riding a bus and viewing the city around me, because certain sections of this take place in London, and there are descriptions of entering into the city by train. Or in one section, a character named Ginny is standing in Piccadilly Tube Station and looking at all the different exits and the hundreds of people passing through this station. And this is both like a viewing of the possibilities of different exits you can take in this station, but also reflecting on the people that she might encounter or know. She is someone that loves to meet and encounter many different people, and but also viewing herself. There's a moment where she sees a reflection of herself, and she's realizing that she's getting older, and this contemplation of her own mortality while viewing all the different possibilities. And there's also another character named Rhoda, who's also standing in a public place in London and viewing the people around her with horror. And because she is a much more introverted character, she finds socializing really difficult and upsetting, and the experience of life itself is really difficult for her. And so we get these different points of view and ways of understanding the world, and knowing that so much of what we view and understand about the world is so much filtered through our own personal experience, and our interpretation of it really depends upon our own personality and way of understanding the world. There is also a way that this book comes to mean so much if you come to understand more about Virginia Woolf herself, the historical figure, and her life. This book will take on even more meaning in that way, knowing when one character dies naturally early, and knowing that Virginia Woolf lost people very close to her in her life early on, and it's the sense of a life being cut short, and continuing on in your life thinking about this person and contemplating how they might have grown and changed alongside you, but can't because of the tragedy of their death. There's also a section where a character is reflecting upon someone he knows has committed suicide, and I find this section so powerful and moving and meaningful, because Virginia Woolf herself was suicidal throughout her life, and ultimately her life was cut short because of suicide. And when this character is reflecting upon this, he says he kind of imagines wishing that he could have stopped her from killing herself, and wishes he could have persuaded her not to. And he reflects, in persuading her, I was also persuading my own soul. And I find this so emotional and devastating, because thinking about knowing Virginia Woolf had this sense of wanting to kill herself, and so her writing this and thinking how maybe in writing this, she was trying to persuade herself not to kill herself, and to know that she ultimately did so. And there are many complicated reasons, and to do with mental health and her own sense of self, of why this ultimately happened. But to read this and to have this resonance with the author herself, knowing what we know now retrospectively about her life in this biographical way, but obviously not knowing, we have her diaries, we have so much about her experience, so we feel like we can have a sense of her life, but we really don't understand what was going on totally in her mind and in her life. And so to read this, I find it so devastating and moving. But then also reading a line like this and relating it to my own life and thinking about people that I have lost, and it has so much resonance and meaning. And of course, it only has that for me, now that I've reached later, not the latest stage in my life, but as I've gotten older and continued to grow, it's an example of why this book has continued to have so much resonance and meaning for me, and why returning to it has been such a valuable experience, and why I continue to discover more things in this book, even though I've reread it countless times. But there's so much in this novel in how she traces the course of these characters' lives, that it has continued to acquire so much meaning for me. But also because of the power of Virginia Woolf's prose, she packs so much into a single sentence that there are many lines in this book that you can set upon and think about and ponder in so many different ways. And because the meaning of it is quite cryptic, it's quite elusive. There are passages I still read where I feel like I don't know what is going on in this passage. I don't understand the meaning of it, and that's okay, because it might have a different meaning at different points in my life, but there are other points where it might be just completely ambiguous. It might not have any meaning at all. So I know there are some other readers that love this book so much and it means a lot to them. And so one of the questions I like to pose to any reader that also shares a love of this book is, what character do you relate to the most? And I think you'll have a different answer to this if you read it at a different point in your life, because of all the reasons that I've just discussed. But I think one of the characters I've resonated with most strongly over the course of reading this book is Susan. There's a character named Susan who is much more domestically orientated. She has really set goals in her life. She knows what she wants out of life. She wants a husband and a family and a home in a rural setting that she can keep and maintain. And so when I asked this question once on social media and put this question out there, and a number of people who also love this novel responded, and I was asked whom I relate to most myself, and I responded Susan. One person responded Susan, but she's so boring, and I think it's easy to make that assumption, but the more you read this book, the more I think you can understand the complexity of Susan's perspective. And she is quite a complex person the more you read about her, because there's one section when she's reflecting back on her life and she thinks, my ruined life, my wasted life. And you think, how can she have this understanding of her life, because she has been so directed in what she wants out of life, and she achieves these things. She gets a home and a family, and there are sections when she is caring for her baby while also maintaining her home, and she feels so content and fulfilled in this. And yet she can reflect back on her life and have this perspective. It seems almost like a contradiction, but I think what Woolf is expressing this is that there are so many contradictory experiences about our lives. We can achieve certain things we want to in our lives, but also feel regret, feel amiss that we didn't take certain different paths in our lives, and we can't help reflecting on, what would have happened if I had got together with this person, if I had taken this different job, if I had moved to this different place or not moved to this different place, how my life had changed. And we can feel the tragedy of the loss of those different experiences, which we weren't able to achieve because out of necessity, we had to make certain choices in our lives. And I think this is part of why this book resonates so strongly in the course of our lives, because we understand this over time and the tragedy of this, but also the joy of hopefully, we have made choices which have led to the fulfillment of different things in our lives, and hopefully we can feel a sense of both achievement and contentment that we've been able to live in a certain way, and to hopefully have people around us that we love, and be somewhere that we love, and do something in our day-to-day lives that we love. And it's so beautiful how this novel expresses this. But of course, there are many different times I'll read this book and relate so strongly to different characters. There's a character named Neville who maintains many private desires that he fosters in kind of secrecy, and there's a character named Louis that feels a lot of insecurity but who achieves a lot professionally, and that makes him feel very fulfilled and part of society, but at the same time he feels outside of society. And there's the character of Rhoda, who has this tragic disconnect with the movement of life and with other people, and the real difficulty she experiences with connecting with other people, so much so that, and with the world around her, and so much so that she questions at certain times whether the world around her is real. This sense of touching a physical object and questioning whether it is actually solid, and how she expresses that can feel so meaningful at different times. But also her social inadequacy. There are certain times when she's meeting up with other people, and it just describes how she kind of skirts around the edges, hoping not to be seen. And I definitely am related to that in different points, and I find big social occasions when I don't know all that many people really difficult. And I know a lot of people feel this way, and the way that Rhoda expresses this, I think is so relatable. And so yeah, there are many different characters I can relate to at different times, but I like to pose that question. I would love to know your answer to that question below. If you have read and loved this book as well, what character do you feel like you relate to the most? I would love to hear the answer to that. But I'd also love to know if you haven't read this book and you would like to give it a chance now that I have spoken about it. I would love to hear about that, if you're going to take a chance and read it. And once you have read it, if you want to come back and comment how you felt about it, whether it was positive or negative, I would love to hear about that as well, because I would obviously highly encourage everyone to read this book. Like I said, it is quite a challenging experience at first, and getting into and understanding it is quite difficult, but I think it is so worthwhile. And if you do, I hope it has the same resonance and meaning for you. I mean, it won't have the exact same, because that's part of the whole thing about it, is that it will mean so many different things to so many different people. And I think because of Virginia Woolf's language, it has the ability to touch us in these different ways, that I think is so beautiful and powerful. And it's why I think it's one of the most incredible pieces of literature that has ever been written, and will probably ever be written. but it's a book that I'm so thankful that I have in my life, that I can come back to it, and I know I will continue to reread it over the course of my life. And so I just reread it recently with my online book group, and it was so wonderful hearing all the different reactions and experiences of everyone who either experienced it for the first time or returned to it. And it developed my appreciation for it so much more, hearing everyone else's astute commentary and how they personally and emotionally related to this book or didn't relate to it. It developed my appreciation for it even more. So I'll put a link below to my online book group if you want to join us, and you can catch up with the discussions and talking about this book and what we're currently reading. It would be wonderful to see you there. But yeah, I wanted to finally talk about this book for that reason, because I've been talking about it so much recently, and it feels like definitely the time to finally discuss why this book is so meaningful for me. So yeah, like I said, I'd love to hear what you think about this book in the comments below. I'm always happy to discuss this book. It makes me really happy when someone gets in touch with me and says, "Oh, I just read The Waves," or "I've just discovered all of your online bookish stuff," and the Waves is also a book that has had a lot of meaning for me, and I want to discuss it. Yes, I'm always happy to talk about this book because there's so much to say about it, and it will have so many different meanings for so many different people that I love to hear everyone's different perspective on it. So thank you for watching me gush about this novel and try to describe why it means so much to me. I hope I have done it justice, and hope I have conveyed why it's such a powerful and impactful book for me. But I hope you're doing well and reading good things, and I'll speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.